Welcome and thank you so much for your patience. We had a router updated on Friday. We tested everything on Wednesday and Thursday and it worked perfectly. So we apologize that we're just improvising here. So the good news is all of the content and presentation will be just as good. We're going to try to make sure everybody in the room is a little bit quieter so you can have your best viewing experience, and we'll get the presentation started shortly. Hello everyone. My apologies for interrupting your conversation. So we are improvisers here at Armor Heights, and we don't need to worry about modems and routers being updated. We can still find a way. So we're finding a way. The one contingent item is we just ask everybody to do their best to minimize the noise, because we don't have our sound system connected directly to the live feed camera. We're just relying on my mobile device. So we just kindly ask that you keep that in mind throughout the presentation. I believe Dr. Harris has done an introduction? No. Okay, and now we'll have the official introduction, but we want to extend our thanks for your patience again. Thank you.
Hello, folks. Did you want to test your mic, Walter? Make sure you're the important person here.
Testing, love, joy, peace.
Yeah, we're good. So what Aaron was also saying, just in case you're wondering, it doesn't affect anybody in this room. It's only for those who are not only joining us right now online, but also will want to, because a lot of people said, look, I can't be there, but can we get the video recording? And that's what we're trying to do, okay? So that's where the issue was. So Walter is, you should check his web page, Walter Dorn, look it up, and it's very extensive. But let me just say a few things, because some of you know Walter in some way and some of you do not. He's Professor of Defense Studies at Royal Military College in Kingston, but also Canadian Forces College in Toronto, almost across the street. He specializes in arms control, international criminal law, just war theory, peace operations, treaty verification and enforcement in the United Nations. And some of this work is on behalf of the United Nations. But on his role on behalf of the UN, he has also been involved with peace and security operations on the ground in conflict situations around the world. And he has also been a consultant, I found this interesting, for the Red Cross International as well, which is very, very important. So I won't say any more, and I will invite Walter to come and give us a presentation. There will be time for questions, so please hold your questions until Walter's ready for them.
Thank you. So a few months ago, Harris asked me to speak, and we decided on politics and spirituality. And I am a public servant, so it means that during the time the grid is dropped until the election, I'm not supposed to talk about politics. So how dare they hold an election the day after I was supposed to speak about politics? However, that's about Canadian politics, and I am a professor of international politics, and I have a good target south of the border that I am allowed to speak about. So that will be a prominent part of what I want to share with you today. I'll just start off with a little prayer. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable unto you, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Thank you. And I feel like I'm coming here as a prodigal son. I might be a professor across the street, but I'm a prodigal son at this church. For a decade, I came here and worshipped and really enjoyed your presence. And then I went off on sabbaticals. I was at the UN in New York. I was doing some field work in Africa. And then I got a place on the other side of town. So I was at another church for about a decade. And then when I came back here, I had such a warm welcome. I really thank you all from the bottom of my heart for making me feel at home. And this is in the spirit of Christian fellowship, and I think today is a way to share some ideas in the spirit of Christian fellowship that I know you experience after church service and of course during the church service. I'm not here to give a sermon, but more of a discussion, share a few ideas. We had such an excellent sermon that I couldn't hope to match given by Harris today, so but I think you'll find a lot of ideas complementary. We live in difficult times. And I find it even affecting my mental and challenging my spiritual state because of the world today. There's so much bad news coming onto our computers and onto our cell phones and TV sets. And we are even making changes in the way we live, move, and work based on the changes in the United States. And the election of Donald Trump came as such a shock. And even more shocking is the flood the zone philosophy that's been taken in the first 100 days of his second presidency. Now, I would have thought that after a first presidency, there was a moment where the American people had realized that the challenges of such a presidency. And when he didn't win in the 2020 election, I thought it was the American people saying to Donald Trump, "You're fired," to someone who ran a TV show, a reality show, based on the expression, "You're fired." But he didn't accept that, and as you know, January 6th riots in Washington, D.C. meant that there was a pushback to try and prevent the election of the real winner, Joe Biden. And we saw the radical right mobilize in favor of Donald Trump, and he did win popular vote. So that's one of the real challenges, is to understand how that happened in the United States. But it's the implications globally that I'd like to address. Politically, and shaking the world up. People who depended on the U.S. to underwrite and stabilize the liberal world order based on liberal values of democracy, the rule of law, prevention of aggression, international organization like the United Nations. These countries are now wondering what they do in the face of a United States that has pulled the rug from under these principles. And now we see a Donald Trump who's cozying up to dictators, whether it be Putin or as we saw with Kim Jong-il. There's a huge Kim Jong-un. There's a huge challenge of the worldview that he's espousing, which is a sort of great man worldview, and puts power above democracy and above certainly the average person and the people who are in trouble in the world. And we saw just a startling economically that the U.S. has now disbanded its Agency for International Development, USAID. $60 billion. There's only a skeleton crew left in that organization, just enough to satisfy the congressional measure that says that it shall exist. But the actual director who was brought in for USAID, whose job was to dismantle the organization. Similarly, we're finding things with the Environmental Protection Agency and with the health organization. So there's all kinds of challenges being posed. Imagine withdrawing from the World Health Organization during a time of health emergencies. That's what we saw Trump do in the first presidency and doing now in this second presidency. Politically, I just can't believe that man's luck. I mean, the fact that he has Congress with him, because the Republicans have won in the House and the Senate, and it's a narrow majority, but still he has the machinery of the executive branch plus the legislative branch, and having appointed 3 Supreme Court justices during his first term, 3 of the 9, he has an advantage there. But we'll see whether the U.S. system of checks and balances, which is the envy of the world, that it could really pioneer democracy and show the world how, as the U.S. wanted to do, you can't have a king running a country. And the U.S. was all about, when it is in the course of human history, that one people dissociate from another because of the wrong actions by a king of the time and wanting to have checks and balances. We now have a person who strives to be a king in his own country, and we want to see whether the checks and balances will work, and it'll be a huge test. And we have politically the challenges, we have economic challenges, socially challenges. A person who got in office by dividing, by othering, by talking about immigrants as if they were hostile, and using the slurs against people whom America had originally been such a welcoming country. The Statue of Liberty represents freedom and hope for people who are oppressed. Give me your poor, the wretched refuse from your foreign shores. That was the light that the Statue of Liberty was holding up, the light to bring other people into the United States and find safe harbor there. And that's now being undermined by a Trump presidency. And then we look internationally at the United Nations, and we see that many of the policies that the U.S. was helping to create a more robust robust UN is being challenged now by votes in the Security Council, by actions that are aligning with the dictator Vladimir Putin. And we're seeing the undermining of UN peacekeeping forces and all kinds of UN initiatives. So on the environmental side, the withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accord, when the world was making so much progress, then we see that we're going backwards. So I painted a grim picture of the effects of the Trump administration, both domestically and internationally, but the issue to which I'd like to turn is really to be solutions-oriented. How can we deal with this challenge? And first I'm reminded about an earlier time, under an earlier presidency, when we were similarly challenged. That was after George W. Bush came in office, and we saw the global war on terror, and we saw many initiatives that were seemed contrary to international law, the use of torture in Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib prisons, the blatant violations of many treaties, including the extraordinary rendition of people to Eastern Europe without due process, the creation of Gitmo, Guantanamo Bay prison, in order to avoid U.S. internal laws. And at that time, I remember going to a concert by Pete Seeger. He was a famous folk artist in the United States who had written those early songs from the 60s. And he told a story about someone who had just and applying it to the Bush presidency, he said, "This too shall pass." So I got comfort from that, and also from humor. I started to watch Jon Stewart, The Daily Show, and see how the media could be used to be able to make fun and make light of what are very serious matters. And so similarly, I turned now to Humor Times, which are wonderful political cartoons that are just able to show so much light and show so much wisdom about the situation. I remember one where you have a Star Wars mock. You have Chewie in the form of the United States embracing Darth Vader, and Han Solo in the back and said, "Chewie, what the heck? What are you doing there?" Or another cartoon who said, "We're taking a break now, we're going to enjoy a summer day, and we're not going to do a political cartoon about Donald Trump." So that was another one of those things that resonated in the political cartoon world. We also can enjoy the fact that no matter what the politics are subservient, they're secondary to divinity, to nature, to the blessings of Mother Earth. And now that we have spring days, I often get my comfort when trying to deal with the problems of politics by looking at something greater, something that's greater than the U.S. government, something that's greater than even international governance. It's the nature, the world of this wonderful nature. As plants start coming through the ground, as birds are chirping, the robins are poking around the grass, and we see this wonderful inspiration from Mother Nature, which gives us new hope. We also get inspiration from a variety of other sources. One is world history. And I'm a strong believer that through the most difficult times, people can endure and actually thrive You can take the most tragic incidents and turn them into something beautiful, resurrection. And just after Easter, we can remember that our Lord himself was crucified on a cross, an instrument of torture, and turned that into the instrument of the greatest hope. And if you look through history, kingdoms have come and gone. Kings and queens have gone. Empires have risen and fallen. But yet Christianity has endured. Now we endure, yes, the challenges of secularization, which doesn't necessarily mean that no role for a church, but keeping the church out of common discourse. And so we have all these challenges today, but the lessons of history have shown us that the Christianity prevails, and it's gone through many travails over the centuries, and is modified as the faithful have kept true to the promise. And I thank you, and I think all of you are helping to keep true to the Christian promise and the Christian fellowship that's all deep in our hearts. And if you look at Christianity, you'll see how during the first century and the first 2 centuries, the Christians were a small minority. They were an empire which was trying to force them to worship pagan gods. And yet Christianity prevailed because the people believed. And even they would be tortured and fed to lions. In fact, when I saw the Pope Mobile taking Pope Francis in front of the Colosseum the other day, I realized that was once a place of Christian torture, where Christian martyrs would willingly go to their death in the face of starving lions in the Colosseum. That now Christianity has prevailed, that Rome plays such an important role in the Christian evolution and in the Christian church. And Pope Francis, of course, was a marvelous example of someone who really wanted to practice the basics of pastoral care, of caring about people above dogma and above other things in the church. And I thank Ferris for that prayer today, for the furtherance and the next selection of the next Pope. May that be a process that brings rejuvenation, not only to the Catholic Church, but helps all churches to bring the message of Christ to the people of the world. And when I look at this rise and fall of empires through history, I see we were learning. Sometimes it was going through terrible dark times, the medieval times. Sometimes it was going through persecution. We even went through a Reformation where the churches were fighting against each other, and Protestantism was born out of great combat, or suffered great combat with Martin Luther King and his 95 Principles theses. And yet we saw that out of that, Christianity managed to resolve those differences. And similarly, it can be an inspiration for how other countries and other ideologies can resolve their differences. And we saw that gradually over time, the principle of the just war theory, which I teach at the college, these were Christian principles brought by St. Augustine, became incorporated into international law. And we get rules on the use of force, that you can't use force unless you have legitimate authority, you have a just cause, you have proportionality of means, you have proportionality of ends, a net benefit, and that you use right conduct. And these have become part of international law and are so important today. And we saw the creation of the Nuremberg trials after World War II, and now the International Criminal Court, something that was just a vague dream. I remember being able to promoting it in the early 1990s, and people would say, well, how could we create an international court? Whose laws would we use? Whose courtrooms would we use? Whose prisons would we use? And those problems were solved, and now we have some of the most powerful leaders who are indicted by the court, including Vladimir Putin. And we also see Duterte from Philippines actually brought to The Hague for an investigation and trial before the International Criminal Court. So the powerful can be challenged, and eventually they can be actually brought before the courts, as we saw with Milosevic, the president of Yugoslavia, when he was brought before the International Criminal Tribunal for former Yugoslavia. And we see today there are Christians who are keeping the faith despite the kind of persecution that we saw in the early Christianity. And I pay tribute to our Persian friends here who are coming from churches in a country where theocracy is putting its very heavy thumb down on people who want to worship based on faith, based on what they hold true in their hearts. And I pay tribute to those people who have kept the faith and now come to our country and worship and make our faith stronger today in this church and in churches across the country. So these are all acts of inspiration, and most importantly, for dealing with times like this where there's utter challenges to find your own inner faith. And I'll share with you, I shared this with Pam a few weeks ago, and then I said, well, maybe it'd be good to share with the congregation more generally. It was a story where my faith was very shaken. And I was working for the UN, and I was deployed to an occupied territory called East Timor. It had 400 years of colonialism under Portuguese rule, and it had 24 years of occupation under Indonesian rule. And the UN was there to help determine the future of East Timor by giving them the right to have in a referendum to determine whether they would have continued be this 27th province of Indonesia, or whether they would get their own independence. And the UN, we were giving ballots out to people, we were registering them, and indeed most of the people there couldn't read or write, so the way that they voted was to take a nail and put it in the box next to either independence or integration with Indonesia. And we ran a difficult campaign, and there were intimidation by proxy forces, militia. Indeed, one of my workers was telling me about how some people were falsely registering. And the militia saw that he was informing on them, and they came to his house, and he ran out the back door, and his mother answered the door and said, well, how can I help you? And they said, if your son continues to cooperate with the UN, we're going to kill him. So he took refuge at the Ave Maria Church in Swai, and I would go visit him there occasionally, but he didn't work for the UN anymore. And the church, I really bonded with the people there, and I could see how Christianity was a great inspiration for them. In their time of genocide they had experienced under the Indonesian rule, and in times of desperation, they found in the church an example of Christ so much hope. In fact, it almost brings tears to my mind when I think about what I saw in the church and how the faith was keeping people alive and keeping them strong in the face of adversity. And we ran the registration process. I was back in New York monitoring the results of the vote in UN headquarters. And the New York Times had said it was a model election. I thought, all my fears were really mislaid, because I had already told the special representative, the Secretary General, and the head of the mission that there was a great danger that there would be false voting and that there was a danger of retribution. And when the vote went so well, I thought, I'm so glad I was mistaken. But within hours, there was a reign of terror. And the militias started burning. They burnt down 90% of the capital, Dili. And in the church where I'd done voter education earlier that summer, there was a massacre, including the worker whom I mentioned who had taken refuge in the church. And so I was dealing with the trauma of that and feeling guilty. In fact, the Global Mail had a front page article saying that the UN had betrayed Timor, and I had felt that I had betrayed those people in the church, because I wanted to be there to be able to help them at the time of the attack. And I wasn't there for them. So I felt the pain of it and anguish. I started to write poetry in order to deal with that, and fortunately there was an intervention. I was helping with promoting getting a peacekeeping force in, and the Australians came within 10 days. There was a peacekeeping force, and it wasn't another Rwanda, and there was new hope. But at that time, I was actually starting to question my faith. I said in one morning prayer, I remember it very well, I was at the Peace Studies program at Cornell University, and before I went off to work, I said, God, I still believe in you, but I can't understand how you could allow this to happen. And about a few minutes later, as I was leaving to go to get on my bike ride to get to the university, I was mounted my bike and started riding the hills, and then I felt the descent of a grace, and I thought, wow, I've never felt this before. And then as it was coming stronger and stronger, I just stopped my bike and said, I can live in this for the rest of my life. It's so beautiful. It's so heavenly that I feel so content. And then as it was coming down and down, I recognized, even in the midst of the greatest happiness that I experienced in my life, there was sorrow. It was a tinge of sadness. It wasn't human sadness. It was such divine sadness. But it was a type of sadness, the closest thing I could think of is like a parent who feels that a child or children are misbehaving and they're hitting each other and that. And the parent has enough love to not want to feel vengeance against any of the wrongdoers. So it was the love for all the people in Timor, even the militia who had done the atrocities. Still, it was universal love. And I was just experiencing the moment of love and joy and peace at the same time. And gradually I was sitting there, it started lifting like a mist coming off, and my mind started kicked in after having the experience. And I said, thank you, Lord, for answering my prayer. Now I understand it's not your will. How could you have let this happen? He didn't. God didn't let it happen. It was human free will that allowed it to happen. It was the Indonesian government. It was President Habibie and General Wiranto that didn't stop it. And that behind this is a God that still cared about the atrocities. And after that, the burden was lifted from me, and I realized somebody with infinitely stronger shoulders than me, someone who can care infinitely more about all of humanity, was feeling the oneness of humanity, and that I myself didn't have to carry that burden because somebody with infinitely stronger shoulders was carrying that burden and was caring and with infinite power. And I'll just end with something that I learned actually, ironically, from the Islamic faith. And I was going through a time of questioning about life at another crisis in my life. And I had a neighbor, and I said, I was trying to understand the Islamic faith a little bit. And he said that Allahu Akbar doesn't mean God is great, which I always assumed that it is, because he said it means God is greater. And it was like a light bulb went off, and I was reminded of our Christian saying that God can do infinitely more than we can ask for or imagine. Infinitely more than we can ask for or imagine. And I also remembered Christ saying, in the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. That there is a transcendent spirit that is in all of humanity and transcends humanity. And that God is always greater, no matter what my circumstances, no matter what's happening to me, the wrong things, the unfairness of life, or the wrong that I myself have done, God is always greater. And God's forgiveness can extend to murderers and slaughterers and people who committed massacres. God's forgiveness can extend to every single human being. And that love is always greater. And I have to be humble about this, about the being human. That being human means coming with all the frailties and all the problems and even the doubts and even the questioning. And in spite of that, there is some being that's infinitely greater than I can ask for or imagine. And that to be associated with that and to speak about that. And so in the midst of the trials and tribulations of a Trump administration, of a world order that's being shaken, of violence all around the world, in all of these countries, there is a great God, and I consider it the supreme honor in my life to be able to praise God, to love God, to serve God to the best of my weak and really fallible human capability. But if there's one thing that's held me through thick and thin, is an awareness of the greaterness of God, that we all have a God who can come to us and comfort us in times of trial and tribulation, and for the opportunity to share in Christian fellowship with you about and be a witness to experiences and to share the experiences of my life and a few thoughts about international affairs and what's going below the border, south of the border. And one last exhortation. Remember, tomorrow is a citizenship's right, and you can exercise that right if you haven't already done so. So we have an opportunity as a democracy, which is actually, in my view, a divine attribute saying that every human being matters. Not the most powerful, not the people with the most weapons, but every human being matters. And so that, for me, democracy is like a sacred right. And it's one more way that we can glorify divinities by using those rights to the best of our ability. Thank you all.
So, what can I say, Walter? A lot to think of. Your humility, your grace, your vulnerability, your honesty. Thank you. It's inspiring. Thank you. Thank you. I know I have a few questions, but I want to give it opportunity to anyone here, and I'll walk around with a mic whenever you've got a question, and Walter is gracious enough to receive it.
And we'll give a chance for folks online to send an email or that was put in the chat, or write your question in the chat, and we'll also take some time to answer questions here and then in the online.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
We will make sure to have all questions answered as long as it's we have only so much time.
This is actually in keeping with Harris's sermon this morning too. The United States, I think, still regards itself as a Christian nation, regardless of whether millennials are choosing to go to church or changing their views of spirituality and so on. But I'm just wondering how a MAGA person in the United States could possibly see how disavowing the UN, disobeying international law, defunding aid organization can possibly make America great again.
Yeah.
Anybody with half a brain, I can't see how they could possibly. The United States is becoming a pariah.
When I'm in New York at the UN, I go to St. Bart's Church. It's on Park Avenue. And I remember the dean of the church there. He was saying, "I'm not going to make a political statement, but giving up all of that aid to the developing world, that's not Christian." And I thought, yeah, he was saying that from the pulpit of a major church in New York. And yeah, it does push the limits. And I've spent all my time all these years just wondering what the appeal is of the idea of rebellion that came into this, wanting to have change. I can understand that. You always try and put yourself in other people's shoes. But I think, at least I can only hope, that a lot of people, when they see what's being done now, the things that you mentioned, George, that they are having their second thoughts. And there will be another election time in 1.5 years, midterm elections. There'll be chances to get some real strong checks and balances in place. And so we can only hope that through actual lived experience, people can realize that there's a better way.
Start arresting judges.
Yeah, arresting judges. Yeah.
Thank you, George. And again, on Page Tuesday night, we've got this book discussion. It really touches on exactly the question George asked and touches on. Questions?
Thank you, Doctor. We are living in very bewildering times. To the best of my understanding, the US has declared an economic war on Canada. No matter how we take it, we know Trump has declared his intentions to make Canada the 51st state. What is your advice to Canadian people? And if in case things go bad, just as Trump is intending, we never know where he's going to. It's very unpredictable. What will be the stance of the global community?
Great question. In 2 words, resist respectfully. And I think that more likely is to be some heavy pressure being put on Denmark for Greenland. That's actually, there's a possibility there with the US bases already there, that there could be some manipulation being done of the population and that. And so we have to make sure that we're really strongly supporting the Greenlanders in their self-determination, that some 50,000 people can't be influenced by a person who's running a country of 330 million. And so we need global solidarity. And one of the things that comes out of all of this challenge is that, like in life, when a system is challenged, it can actually become stronger. Well, the old saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So the international community, seeing that there are violations of treaties, strengthening the World Trade Organization, we hope we can come out of this stronger so we can have the tariff complaints, which that's the proper form to do it. Indeed, China is doing it. It's going to the WTO, World Trade Organization, to be able to help resolve this through expert panels. These violations of international law. Now, it turns out to be very fortunate that we have a free trade agreement that Donald Trump himself signed, because if we still had the old NAFTA, he would just throw it out. But you can't say, I want to negotiate a better deal for America when he's the one who negotiated the previous deal. It was NAFTA, and then you had CUSMA, Canada-US Mexico agreement, or USMCA as the US likes to call it. And because of that, we were in a better position. I think that there's just so little support in America for any notion of 51st state that it's just another fantasy of Trump. And it's not really possible. But we can see ways in which there'll be all kinds of pressure put on us and to diminish Canada as a state. And that, of course, we have to resist. And so we are very selective in our counter tariffs. It seems to me, no comment on Canadian policy as a civil servant, but that is one way you can deal with it.
Thank you.
I had the privilege of being on Project Plowshares as the Presbyterian representative for years. We were all about disarmament. Now, the Americans are saying that we owe them billions because they've been protecting us for years, and therefore we need to protect ourselves. And I realize I've got a question for you, but it has to do with Canada, so you probably can't answer it. But I feel torn because I am all for disarmament, but at the same time, our military has to be strengthened, I think, and it seems to me that's a paradox. But I don't know what to do with that. And I feel sorry for the people on Project Plowshares board right at the moment, because I think they've got a real struggle on their hands.
Right.
I don't know how you can comment.
Well, Harry, I'll comment on the global level. And thanks so much for your service in Project Plowshares. It's a wonderful organization. It's really the peace and disarmament arm of the churches, Canadian churches. And they're doing wonderful work on all kinds of issues relating to outer space, non-weaponization, nuclear weapons, the arms trade and that. And I will work carefully and closely with Cesar Yaramillo and others at Plowshares, and spoken on many panels along with them. So I really appreciate their work. This world spends more than $2 trillion on armaments. That is the US AID that I was talking about is about 60 billion. The total world on official development assistance, ODA, is around 150 billion, but arms are $2 trillion. This world is out of whack in that. And if I look and compare NATO to, let's say, Russia, the NATO far outspends. The United States defense budget is $880 billion, $880 billion. Russia's budget before the 2022 invasion was 60 billion. Canada's defense budget, 30 billion. So Russia paying about double. Now, you do have purchasing power parity that comes into these kind of calculations, but the basic fact is that we are far outspending Russia, and we're forcing China into an arms race. and now it's going close to $200 billion for budget. But even still, even China and Russia together isn't even half of what the US is spending. And the US has been doing that the last many decades. I mean, you can even say the last half century, I was spending at a far greater pace. So the argument that we're being outspent by presumed enemies is false. And it's the argument for turning your swords into plowshares and your hooks into pruning hooks. Yeah, pruning hooks. Right. So, this is very. It's a principle that we still need to keep and cherish. And the security dilemma is that as we spend more, then the other parts of the world say they have to spend more, and then we said, well, now we have to spend more than them, and we're already seeing that, and now we're forcing China to weaponize nuclear. Used to have 300 nuclear weapons for 40, 50 years. Now they're pushing towards 1,000. And I don't want to see that's the way that humanity ended because we just didn't know how to deal with that nuclear power. I just make one comment about nuclear power, and it's a fact that I did my PhD with a scientist who worked for George Kościuszki at Harvard, who was the man who created the implosion device for the first nuclear weapon. It was in Alamogordo, New Mexico, when they set it off and then helped design the Fat Man and Little Boy bombs. And the bomb they set off and that was used in Hiroshima was 15 to 20 kilotons in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, of equivalent of TNT. The one bomb the Russians set off in Novaya Zemlya in 1961 was 55 megatons. And that may just be a number, but all of World War II, all the explosions, including Dresden and London and Berlin, and that was only 5 megatons. So one bomb was 10 times the amount. So science has given, including some of my predecessors in science, has given humanity this immense capacity for destruction. And we still have to become mature enough to beat those nuclear arms into plowshares and make sure that we never have to use nuclear weapons ever again. Nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought.
Thank you. Other questions?
Hello. I'm going to read this from off screen, but we have a question online. Today and in the past, Christianity has been the banner under which so much violence and oppression has been wrought. As Christians today, how do we reconcile our past and take a position that edifies Christ?
Yeah, wonderful question. Yes, we have to recognize that, and I think Harris did a job today to the residential schools and other phenomenon, and Christianity was used as an instrument of colonization. We have to recognize that. But if I look at the influence, the main atrocities are committed by those who seek power, not those who seek to follow Christ. And so the institutions may have been used and misused, and our understanding as a global society has evolved. Remember, there was a time when it was considered, you could consider practices like slavery, or the divine right of kings to justify why kings were in power, or public dueling, or executions, public executions. These were all phenomenon. Even now, the death penalty is still in some parts of the world, but the majority we're getting rid of that abhorrent practice. Conquest, that one nation could go ahead and conquer another side and do so in the name of Christianity or Islam or any other faith. These are notions that we're transcending, and I think Christianity has transcended. So I think that we can find the inspiration from the Christian theology and from Christian practice, but it's not to say that we're a perfect religion. We're still a human form that is just trying to capture a drop of the infinite divinity that exists in this world. And so Christianity is itself a flawed instrument, a flawed vessel for that divinity. But as long as it keeps trying to improve, let's try and recognize our mistakes, practice the Christian principle of forgiveness, including of ourselves, then we can begin to get a better Christianity that can better serve the world and the evolving principles of humanity, of inclusion and diversity, equality.
Thank you, Walter. Maybe a last question. I know I have one, but I want to give that opportunity for others.
I guess this is more geopolitical. Okay, my brain goes a little further when it's coming to Trump and Putin. We got one on each side of us. How, on a world geopolitical scene, are people concerned about those two being friends and possibly having common interests? I mean, we've got a Northwest Passage and airspace that gets threatened on a regular. So my brain goes that far, which is maybe a little too far into the future. But I'm wondering on a geopolitical scale if that is a concern for other nations of those two powers being on the same page.
Yes, it's a concern. In Europe, people are just shaking their heads. They can't believe it. They think that they may need to defend Ukraine alone, and that there is a need to try and deal with Trump. They're trying different ways. A lot of it is kowtowing, but still being firm on principle, but trying to flatter and tell the emperor how great he is, at the same time as trying to put some common sense in. It often doesn't work. But here again, Pope Francis's death, even in his death, is bringing Zelensky and Trump together in the Vatican to be able to have conversations. So you can have this important, really important conversation so that you can see that the Ukrainians are in the right and get this false notion that somehow Ukraine started the war. Absolutely erroneous by any historical interpretation. And the Putin is also, it's got such a dark streak inside him. Sometimes when I used to think, when I was a kid, I was thinking, what situation would I actually use an armament, right? And I was saying, and I saw at Expo 67 Hitler's car and had a bullet hole in it. So yeah, I decided when I was a kid then, I would think it would be right to pull the trigger in that situation. Nowadays, I used to think, yeah, Putin would be somebody that would be worthy of that target. But then I actually divinized it and I made it actually better for myself. I think of little diamonds just coming through and destroying that image. And it's a way of dealing with it inside myself, because in the end, the real war is inside myself. And seeing that the character destroyed. What you can learn from history is that when two leaders got together in Germany and Russia, in Stalin and Hitler, and they came up with the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, that those two leaders, they sort of were agreeing on how to carve up the world. It was much worse than it is today. But the fact that these two people, don't look at them as a monolith. They have such selfish interests that they can very easily go against each other as well. And you're already seeing that now with one of Trump's tweets or X's in the last few days has been, stop Vladimir, stop, right? Just direct appeal, because after the non-acceptance of a ceasefire, 30-day ceasefire, an unconditional ceasefire, or a ceasefire on energy infrastructure or on the Black Sea, Putin didn't accept any of that. So you're beginning to see the clash of wills. And that can easily flare up and cause the reality of the situation to dawn. So I don't see it as being an impossible situation. It's not monolithic, but it's definitely a worrying one. And we have to speak out. And so NATO heads and that are doing that. They're trying to strengthen their own defenses so that if they have to rely on defending Ukraine themselves, they can.
Thank you, Walter. One question I have, and it's a question that a lot of folks ask me, and that is because I was listening very, appreciatively your personal sharing the story and so on, and how you kind of experienced God in the midst of this, struggle. To me, it's sort of, how do you bring together forgiveness, which is not only a call of Christ, but he embodies it, through the cross and so on, with the call for justice, and especially on behalf of those who have been victims and are victims, and cannot be so easily reconciled. Is the problem with them, or is it is sometimes forgiveness too easy? Is it a bit too unjust or reconciliatory? So I don't know your comments, because you're right in the middle of all this as you ponder it.
The way that I try and deal with that is I say emotional forgiveness to everyone, including Vladimir Putin, but you still want the justice to be done in a way that that's understandable. That's why we have courts. We're not saying no one should go before a judge. You still need that impartial judge who's not going to go in there and out of hatred sentence someone to life imprisonment, but out of a sense of justice. So we need to strengthen those international mechanisms so that we can have justice and inner peace at the same time. So take the emotion out of it, but make justice a rational act. And at the same time, you can emotionally forgive someone, but they still may need to go to jail.
Well, we could be here all day. This is wonderful. Walter, you've given us so much, and now that everyone knows who you are, you will not be left alone too often. As developments happen, we've got an election tomorrow, and who knows what'll, unfortunately, there's so much uncertainty, as someone already mentioned, in the world, but thank you. Appreciatively, both you spoke from your heart, but also all your knowledge and experience, and you're right in the thick of it, and it's rare and so appreciated to have someone like you among us. Thank you. So folks, you're free to
Thank you for watching.
go